Reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 14th chapter. On one occasion when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. When he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you're invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host, and the host who invited both of you may come and say to you, "Give this person your place." And then, in disgrace, you would start to take the lowest place. But when you're invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, "Friend, move up higher." Then you'll be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He said also to the one who had invited him, "When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." The Gospel of the Lord. Well, I suppose you've noticed, in today's text, Jesus seems to know a thing or two about the way we human beings think and react and make choices. Seems he observes pretty closely, especially how we live together and how we love together. And look where Jesus does a lot of his observing. He notices at the table, at feasts, at times when people eat together and celebrate together, the times when folks offer hospitality. Oh, and Jesus is really interested in who eats with whom, who's invited, and who might be ignored, who has a seat at the table and who is left out. Now here's where Jesus can get under our skin. Here's where Jesus observes our motivations as well as our actions. As we say about preachers sometimes, now you've stopped preaching and gone to meddling. Why would Jesus meddle with our motivations, do we suppose? Look, he tells the host of the dinner, a religious expert and influential leader. Jesus tells him flat out, a parable first, a story to help him and all of us listening, a story to help us imagine and let us put ourselves in someone else's shoes before we realize the shoe fits our own feet. Why would Jesus go to meddling with our motivations? After all, he's the Son of God. Can't he just command us, love one another, and leave it at that? Can't the Lord of life simply tell us to live and to love and expect us to hop to it and obey? Well, Jesus is indeed the Son of God, who knows how we are inside out. Yet let's never forget, Jesus calls himself the Son of Man. He lives fully our human life and sees, how he sees. We are people who can be wide awake and noticing who needs love, and then at the same time, we're people who can be blind as a bat without signaling sounds. Folks who routinely miss the needs of others even what's missing in ourselves. Jesus is a keen observer. He likes to see clearly that we're so likely to make choices, oh dear, putting ourselves first. He doesn't like to see that. But maybe on behalf of some other folks, we should make those choices once in a while. Well, sometimes we'll just say when it's convenient or it suits us. Trouble is, God did not design us to be selfish, did he? Nor arrogant, nor rude. Why not? Well, we've been created in the image of the one who loves and loves each one, regardless of who they are, or where they came from, or what choices they're making, or how much they ignore God and one another. You and I will always be loved by the one who gives us life in the first place. I was moved recently reading a book on suffering by a man who had suffered himself and who had devoted his life to listening for God's ways. Hubert Van Zeller wrote, "We may hardly realize it, but whether we are believers or not, our loneliness is really a homesickness for God. A homesickness for God." I'm hearing that. Somewhere deep inside us, we're all longing for God. We may not even recognize it. Whoever we are, wherever we go, we're all longing for God because God has made us and draws us to himself. Don't you imagine Jesus knows that? Of all people who ever lived, Jesus knows our confusion, our loveless ways, and our deepest need. He knows they're baked in, this need for God, the God-given connection to a love that will not let us go. So, here's Jesus, eating dinner with folks who have long served God, actually. And in their culture and in their society, the way they do things has been approved. Trouble was, many of those ways led to leaving out people God loves just as much as the one society does approve, and who actually believe God was blessing them first. You bet your booties, God looks on the heart. Jesus knows how we live, how we love, and how we make our choices. So he tells that dinner host and paints a clear picture of the way a banquet might look if God sent out the invitation. Let's see. What if you invite folks who have no way to pay you back, he says, might even be the last in line for favor and blessing? What if your guests of honor were poor people, people who can't walk, people who are blind and can't work? Don't look now, but Jesus is naming folks in that society who would likely be beggars, people without any means of support, people who could not be taxpayers, nor pull themselves up by their bootstraps, their own initiative. Jesus says, invite them, bless them, notice them. And why should anyone who's better off pay attention to these folks? Because God does, of course. Because God loves each and every one. Because God calls us to be the hands and feet of Jesus, coming close enough to care. Listen to this true story of what happened in an airport one day. A young mother and toddler were in the airport waiting to board a flight. and the little child was having a meltdown. Some of you have been there. Well, the mom was also pregnant and traveling alone with this toddler. She just sat out on the floor and cried herself. Her toddler lying beside her was kicking and screaming. And then 6 or 7 women, strangers to this woman and each other, slowly came around and one by one sat down beside this woman and the child. And they wound up forming a circle around her. And one started singing a little song to the child to distract him. Another one offered a bottle of water. Someone else had an orange. And another one gave the child a little toy. Well, pretty soon, both mother and child had calmed down, and they were able to board their plane. My favorite thought about this, told by one of the women in the circle, was, it occurred to me that a circle of loving people with a mission can save the world. You and I know that to be true, don't we? See, no one forced people to help. No one demanded that they care. They just knew they could, and they did. You and I know we can care, even sometimes when it's hard or unusual. You and I know the Spirit of Jesus is within us and can move those hands and feet to love and bless and notice. We're going to remember what Van Zeller wrote. We are all, each one of us, even the worst of us, even when we don't realize it, we're all homesick for God. It's in us to long for the love of God, our Maker. And it's not a matter of blessed are the few, or blessed are the lottery winners, or blessed are the perfectly healthy, wealthy, and supposedly wise. No, you hear what Jesus says. You see what he sees. Sometimes we need to realize that first to be last, the ones who look most successful and have all the toys, they may wind up being humbled. Because Jesus sees and invites us to see. Let everyone come. Let everyone eat, because God loves people without exception. God's whole creation, and always will.